There's been so many changes to generative art in the last few years, and the idea of the Source exhibition is to look back at what happened most recently and to really think about what works have really moved us or what works do we find really interesting. So it's not meant to be a survey show. It's not meant to be comprehensive. It's really meant to reflect what operator, what Def Beef, what I have found to be really exciting projects over the last few years, and for us to talk about them in a way that's very personal too, to really think about how these works have informed our own work, and to talk about what we find exciting about them and to share that with other people. I'm Casey REAS. I'm an artist and a co-founder of Fairfile.
Hi, I'm the artist known as Def Beef. I'm best known as an audiovisual generative artist. I have a varied background. I've jumped around between a patchwork of different interests. I've worked as a recording studio engineer. I've studied computer graphics academically. I spent the last few years running a craft business as a blacksmith, and I like computer games. And I'm broadly interested in systems and generativity. Yeah, I'm very honored to be participating, curating these wonderful artworks.
Hi, I'm Dejha Ti. I'm one half of Operator, the collaborative art practice and experiential artist duo, bringing together creative technology, performance art, and large-scale immersive environments. My background is as a human-computer interaction technologist, as well as an immersive artist. Both Ania and I have the human body as a core aspect to our practice. Ania, I'll hand it to fill that part out.
My name is Ania Catherine. I'm part of Operator. My background is in choreography, performance art, and I've been working with the human body as a medium for many years. And then upon working with Dejha, started kind of bringing together where the human environment and technology come together.
So one thing that's happened in the last few years that's been wonderful for my part of the community of generative arts, which is primarily visual, is meeting a lot of people who are writing, people who are poets, and seeing how the work that they're doing with language and generativity and the work that is more visual is beginning to merge, the way collaborations are happening. But for people like myself who haven't had a strong connection to language before, learning more about that and more about the history of generative work and language has just been wonderful.
One thing that just came to mind, I'll just throw right now, is that like I see connections between some of the pieces that like are about language and about how central to our identity, and also like it's kind of an innate human thing, language and voices, right? So Holly Plus with the it's really personal and part of our identity, and so there's some works that deal with that theme.
Yeah, Holly Plus and technology. So obviously technology is text kind of centric, but this idea of creating like a second self-esque being that then creates in the Holly Plus case, literal voice, or in Sasha's case, written voice is also really nice. We see those with the similar tag.
Well, that's another interesting thing that I think's happened in the last few years is the space in between text and sound, or voice and text, has compressed because of all of the changes that have happened in text-to-speech technology and speech-to-text technology. And so those works that may have felt far apart before are now feeling closer and closer.
There's a thread of creating a voice, like generating a voice from an established voice in technology, in DADA and in Maya Mann's Fake It Till You Make It, because she is recreating the voice of like Instagram inspirational posts. So all of them are kind of using generative art as a way to recreate a voice and then let that voice make its own statements.
I think the reference made earlier to Alison Knowles' Ask the Dust is an interesting reference too, just as being such an early language piece. And Maya's Fake It Till You Make It is not working with machine learning. It's more like Ask the Dust. It's more like combining phrases and words together. And so that's a direct reference to, I think, going back to that work, and moves a little bit in a different way on a different current than a lot of the work being made with language now, the pure generative work like Ross Goodwin's work and technology.
playing Boys of Summer. And then I returned to Heaven Computer today again. And both of them have this feeling of when you're in the browser, you're like in another land, kind of like from the music to the style of like how you click and like what things that you click look like the way that they combine like interface design, audio, and art into kind of like a world in the browser. It's very much like you're entering into a world when you experience the work.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that like the theme of like world building and the capacity for, computational and generative art to be to dynamically, have these expansive worlds that you can enter into, whether that's through the UI of a browser or whether it's something like that, like the experiment that Terraforms is attempting to do with having a, kind of virtual land, a virtual world in the context of this new kind of computational paradigm of a public programmable ledger. And it is also about world building. And I think that overlaps with games and lots of themes within generative art and generativity.
How do you feel Terraforms relates to games, Tyler?
Well, I think on the surface, the visual aesthetic is ASCII art. And so that might make a reference to Dwarf Fortress or other kind of roguelikes, which are the canonical kind of procedural generative games. I don't know the real definition of a game, to be honest. Like Boys of Summer is a game. Is Terraforms a game? I think it's maybe influenced by games. I think that it taps in with people's prior knowledge of the framework of games, maybe to have them participate. I think it's more of a sandbox game, like in that sense.
I think there's been an interesting theme arising around computational works and generative artworks that don't necessarily look at only the final output, but don't only look at art as object, but art as experience, art as also duration. And I think there's quite a bit of commonality between the works and the curatorial themes, I think, for this show. One that just seemed to emerge is duration and looking at generative art not only as an output, but also, and not just as an art object, but as an experience.
I think two of those are Harm van den Dorpel's work, the way that you never really know when it's going to mutate. You could look at it one day, the next day it'll be the same, and then sometime in the future, it may look radically different than it did just a moment before. And the fact that time is indeterminate, that time is unknown, I think is really exciting. Another is Matt Kane's Gazers, the way that it's tied to the cycles of the moon, and that there are these events that happen when the moon is in different phases. There are moments that are really unexpected to collectors, even who have been looking at the work for a long time.
Siebren Versteeg for a limited time fits into this also aspect of art and with duration, but the unexpected, like you don't know, there's this like level of commitment or this almost hesitation to commit to like, okay, this is the moment when you have to like claim the piece, and this idea where you have to almost end the relationship. So I also think it's almost the opposite of Lauren's piece, right? Because with Lauren's piece, you have to keep interacting in order for it to stay alive. And then we have Siebren's piece where at one point you have to make a commitment, but the commitment then ends the experience.
I think an interesting thing about Siebren's too is that it ends one piece of the experience and begins another, like another phase of the relationship with it. And I think checking the site, every few days and seeing what is there, kind of like being aware of what's going on in the news and then checking to see what paintings have been generated with his code is a really interesting dynamic. And I think a new one too. I think the fact that the artwork is always being made, always looking at the world, making new options, and then it's up to us to sort of capture the precise piece from that collection that we want to hold forever.
There's also collaboration as a theme, at least between Anna Lucia and G's Bend and Iskra and Zach, which when I first saw it, I wasn't really sure how much of a collaboration it was with the Quilters, but then after seeing the video, it did really look like a combination of that tradition and their style and their way of creating and Ana Lucia's way of creating. And so I think those are two strong collaborations within.
You know, Holly inviting people to use their voice to make artworks. Terraforms, their intent is for the dynamically generated things to be primitives, to be used as Lego blocks. And they've been successful in having a strong community of people that there's like an ethos of community of experimentation with these things together, educating each other, learning from each other, observing. Those values are showcased in many of these works.
And that's something that's been a really important part of artists working with code for a long time, is collaborating with each other. I think there's an openness to that and an excitement about it.
Maybe there's some tie of physical and digital, which I would consider Mario Klingemann's going into, because it has the physical sign, the human kneeling, and in Jonas's piece, you have physical objects in his house falling that results in the objects in the artworks falling. So you have a relationship between physical and digital, which also, if I understand Gazers correctly, which maybe I don't, there's also a way that the artwork is reflecting something that's happening in the physical world now.
It is, yeah, it's planetoid bodies is being reflected through the artwork.
Elizabeth, you would like us to talk about Melissa and Emily.
They're both artworks that are made with code, but referencing prior forms of visual art. They both have a ground, in Emily's case, in collage, this idea of having media, having existing forms, cutting things out, and then using those cutouts to make new meaning through the act of collage. And in this case, Emily is creating the materials to collage with code, and then building those collages. And then with Melissa's work, there's a strong reference to calligraphy and forms of non-Western forms of writing. I think through deep study of that, through simulation of water-based pigments. And so it's moving away from being a generative work. Many generative works are sort of composed of, lines, circles, other forms. And it's really moving into writing and other influences.
Yeah, and like simulating the physical with the digital in a way.
Yeah, both of the works are simulating the physical, more analog media with digital tools and expressions. Yes. I want to talk quickly about Travess Smalley's work and Qubibi's work, which both premiered on Hiketnunk. That was such a vibrant space for sharing work and collecting work and experiencing work. And I think these two pieces of generative art are outstanding because the creators have been working on them for such a long time. I think a lot of art block style releases, the creator or the artist will make the code and then the work will all get released within a span of a few minutes, with a lot of randomness built in into sort of like which pieces are seen, which pieces become official. But for these two works, the artist has continued to work on them for years, and every single output is highly, highly curated. And so there are these like longer durational artworks that were begun during this period of amazing energy in the early days of Hiketnunk.
I'm looking at Mimizu right now. They're so incredibly beautiful. Also, I see that there's a reference, they're referred to as a digital stitch, which kind of could put it into the simulation category because there's a reference to weaving and stitching in the descriptions of Mimizu. Well, these are so beautiful.
I think fabrics and textiles come up a lot in many of the artworks. I think that's maybe notable. Textiles have connection to computing. And then also we're talking about participative and societal social interactions. And so fabrics of society, and we're talking about threads, lineages and histories. It's just something that I noted that those themes come up a lot. One theme that I see, and maybe one that I'm biased towards, is like a cybernetic mashups of many different systems that are all like in a pipeline or feed into each other. That's a theme in Sarah Zucker's work, using many different systems, analog and digital. that feed into each other and really kind of showcases the roots of some threads of generative art history in electronics and optical art, video feedback, cybernetics, nonlinear systems.
Yeah, we talk a lot about the history of generative art going back 60 years, and we think about a lot of the artists who were doing plotter drawings at the time, people like Vera Molnar, people like Manfred Moore. But of course, video is another thread that moves directly into generative art. And all the video hackers, all the people making video synthesis rigs out of analog technology and sharing those with other people, that's another really rich history for what's happening now. And so, yeah, Sarah Zucker's work and many others are integrating analog video technology with emerging digital technologies to create work that's never been seen before. And it has this reference to the past, but at the same time, it's extremely contemporary.
Yeah, I think a really strong part of this exhibition and curation is drawing attention to all those different histories of generative art. One that I'll throw out there now is the connections of, instruction-based art to conceptual art. One work that we have here is Steve Pikelny's Instructions for Defacement. And that, makes reference to the instruction-based conceptual art, whether it's for aesthetics like Solowit or just the kind of more conceptual art of the 60s and 70s that's instructions-based. And then also the connection to plotter-based works of early computer art. And then uses those references and then filters it through his own kind of style and body of work that makes reference to things that are relevant within the crypto scene, currencies, legalities. And I just think it's a really elegant, humorous, fun, absurdist kind of take on, and it makes use of the form of generative art and goes beyond it to make reference to these themes.
Another absurdist project is DADA again. Who's making generative arts since 2019, but then also is its own like hype machine as well, and kind of playing into the most absurd stereotypes that you could think of an NFT artist through ChatGPT programmed by Judy Nam from DADA. So I think it's a different approach than the instructions approach, but it still has this tie to, I think, to absurdism. And I also think what's absurd is Primavera's plantoid, this kind of the plantoid being this location where ETH just goes into a dark hole and swallowed and like never regained. So it's just like eating ETH, like these kinds of elements that are, obviously there's some critical commentary there. Primavera is a copyright lawyer who doesn't believe in copyright. Prima always talks about the output itself is not copyrightable. I think it's interesting to think of plantoid as its own like life form, creating its own work, and it also can't be owned.
Yeah, I think that works that are subversive are quite interesting, and that might include some other works here as well, like life forms, something that subverts the idea of, I don't know, pure ownership, that rather than it's that, then it's about nurturing and stuff.
I like that idea of the constellation between the artwork, the artist, and the audience becoming like a system that needs to be maintained, almost like a theme of care emerges, and like especially in pieces like Lauren's, Sarah Friends, and Primavera, where the audience literally is like keeping the work alive, and like the system between the artist, the artwork, and the audience is one of artwork survival.
Like blockchain as a system, as a fertile ground for enabling different types of generative systems. Like it's usually, as the interesting ones are the ones that use it as a proxy for social interactions, like just as a common reference point for people to be able to do whatever type of social mechanism, and using that as like a game board or like a reference.
And also thinking about generative art in a different way, as more of a conceptual medium rather than as a visual medium. And I think the way that the code is created to interact with the blockchain for transferring work from one person to another, or keeping the work alive according to the artist's wishes by visiting it once a day. I mean, those are really different ways of exploring and thinking about the future possibilities of generative art. And we're very excited to feature those in this short selection.